Welcome back to another episode of Math with Dr. Math. So I'm working outside here. So again, if it gets a little too windy, too noisy, you guys comment below, let me know, and I'll make sure to take the show inside next time. All right, but I want to enjoy some sun, take advantage of our weather here. All right, so we're looking at factoring trinomials, and our leading coefficient here is going to be greater than 1. All right, so let's look at example 1 here. Let me zoom in so we could get some more landscape here. And we want to factor each polynomial completely. All right, so I'm going to teach you this new method called the AC method. All right, so we're going to look at the AC method, and we are going to look at quadratics of the form ax squared plus bx plus c. So please make sure your quadratics are in descending order. Okay, make sure it's in standard form so that we could perform these operations correctly. All right, so let's take a look here. All right, so the AC method, what it tells us to do here is we're going to take our A term, right, our A coefficient, and our C coefficient, excuse me, because the AC method, and we're going to multiply those. So we're going to multiply the A coefficient and the C coefficient. We go ahead and multiply those, and I should say our C constant, right, because there's no variable there. So we multiply those and we get negative 15. All right, so there's our number that we look at on top. And then our number on the bottom, if we recall from our other video, is this middle coefficient, which is negative 2. So we're looking for two numbers that multiply to give us the top number and to add up to give us that bottom number. All right, so try to figure that out. Try to find two factors that multiply to give us negative 15 and add up to negative 2. And after you go ahead and list them, you're going to see that negative 5 times 3 is going to add up to negative 2 here. And when you multiply them, is going to give us this negative 15. All right, so what do we do with these two mother factors? All right, so here's the name of the game. This is how this game's going to work. You take your first term, which was 3p squared. It stays the same. You take that negative 5 term, it stays the same. But your middle term right here is now going to break up into two terms. All right, so that is going to break up into two terms. And guess what those two new terms are? You guessed it. Negative 5p and 3p. All right, so whatever those two factors were that you found, that's what's going to replace that middle term, the negative 2p. And of course, when you add those two, you get that negative 2p. All right, so now if we count these, notice you end up with how many terms? So we got 1, 2, 3, 4 terms. So now that we have 4 terms, we could go ahead and proceed with factoring by grouping. So we look at these terms right here. These first two, what do they have in common? Well, we see that they have the p in common, so we'll factor out a p. The second two terms right here, what do they have in common? Well, they have nothing in common. So when they have nothing in common, we're going to go ahead and factor out a 1. All right. So now let's go ahead and let's see what's left in our parentheses. So these first sets of parentheses, after we factored out the p, we saw we were left with 3p minus 5. And you could always check that by distributing, and when you distribute, you better get what you started with, right? So that works out nicely. And our other factors, we get 3p minus 5. All right, so let's go ahead and let's see what we could do next. All right, so we look at our factors, and we see, oh, we could factor out a 3p minus 5. And after we pull out the 3p minus 5, we see that we're going to be left with a p plus 1. And this is how you perform, this is how you factor using this AC method. Alright, so there's our very first example. And again, just explaining the process is a little longer than actually doing it. So we're going to see that we're going to become more and more efficient at working these problems. Alright, so let's look at example 2 here. Notice we have our A term, our B term, our C term. We have, well, I shouldn't say term, but we have our coefficient of 2, so that's going to be represent our A. Our coefficient of 3 here, that's going to represent our B. And our coefficient of C here, our constant, excuse me, that's going to be our C. So let's go ahead and get to work. So we know on top here, for this top piece, we're going to multiply A times C. So A times C, 2 times negative 9, that's how we get that negative 18. Alright, what goes down here is always our B term, excuse me, our B coefficient, which is going to be 3. Alright, so we need two numbers, two factors that when you multiply them, alright, these two factors, they're going to give you this negative 18. But when you add them, they're going to give you this 3. So again, after going ahead and listing all your possible factors, you're going to conclude that we are going to end up with positive 6 and negative 3, because when you multiply those two, you get that negative 18, just like you're supposed to. When you add them, you get that positive 3. Alright, so if I take this, I'm going to leave this first term and last term alone. So that 2n squared, I leave it alone. That negative 9, I leave it alone. It's always that middle term that you're going to split up using your two new factors. Alright, so one was positive 6n, the other was negative 3n. Someone's probably about to ask, wait, does it matter which order they go in? Absolutely not. You're always going to get the same result. Great question. So we go ahead and we group the first two, the second two. So the first group, what do they have in common? Well, we could factor out a 2n. The second group, well, we could factor out a 3 from here, but don't forget, always drop that sign that's in the middle, so minus 3. Alright, what are we left with in our factor? So if we pull out 2n from here, we're left with n. If we pull out a 2n from here, we're going to be left with a positive 3. Excellent. Alright, and then if we go ahead and factor out the negative 3 from here, we're going to be left with the positive n. Let me change my colors. Positive n. And if we pull out a negative 3 from here, you're going to end up left with a positive 3. So notice, they both have that positive n plus 3. So I'll factor that out because that's what they have in common. And I'm left with the following in parentheses, 2n minus 3. So there are my factors. And again, don't forget from last time, the fastest way to check them, you multiply the inner, you get 6n. Multiply the outer, you get negative 3n. When you add those two, you get that 3n, which is exactly what we wanted. Alright, so hopefully that made some sense there. So this is called factoring using the AC method. Alright. Alright, so let's go ahead and do one more here. And I think after this example, you finally understand if you're still struggling with this. Alright, so let's give this one more shot. And let's factor this like it's 1999. Here we go. Alright, I got A times C. So I got 3 times 4, I got that 12. What number's going on the bottom there? What number are you putting right there? Bam, good, negative 8. Okay, so we're looking for two numbers that multiply to give us the 12. They add up to 8, negative 8, excuse me. So we'll mess with some numbers, we'll make a list, right? So let's think of all the numbers that give us 12. 1 times 12, 2 times 6, 3 times 4. Alright, so we list all the possibilities, and then you say, well, which combination can give you a negative 8 if I slap some signs on there? So 1 and 12, no way that could give you 8. 3 and 4, regardless of what signs I slap on there, boom, it's not happening. 2 and 6, well, what happens if they're both negative? Well, when they're both negative, they multiply to give me positive 12, and they add up to negative 8. So there you have it. So again, sometimes it's helpful to go ahead and list the factors, because most of my students, what they do is they look up to the sky and they start looking left and right up into the sky, and they're just waiting for the answer to hit them right between the eyes. So again, write something down. Okay, write something down. I can't emphasize that enough. All right, so we get 3n squared. Remember, this first term stays the same. The 4 stays the same. This negative 8, you're breaking it up to two numbers. You just found those factors. Negative 2, it's always going to stay. See how this is an n right here? Whatever letter or letters, whatever variable or variables you see there, that's what comes along for the ride. All right, so there you have it. It was positive 4, so let me keep it black so it stays positive. All right, we have 4 terms, factor by grouping. Here we go. All right, so the first 2 terms have an n in common, so I'll factor out the n. The second 2 terms right here have a 2 in common. Don't forget, always pull out that sign that's in front. So we're pulling out the negative 2. We're factoring out that negative 2. So what are we left with? The first term, we're left with 3n minus 2. For the second set of parentheses, 2 times what gives us negative 2 times what gives us negative 6? Well, we're left with negative 3n. Notice it was a positive 4, but you factor out a negative, so that's going to change the sign there. All right. Let's see if you could catch a mistake. Perfect. So here's the mistake. Trying to see if people are awake instead of just copying blindly. Notice you factor out a negative 2. What's negative 2 times negative 3? Is that going to give you a negative 6? Absolutely not. So this is a very common mistake that I want to make sure you highlight. So it's just a positive 3. You don't have to have the positive sign, but again, we're just fixing that there. Because now, and only now, because these are the same, can you factor them out. So if they're not exactly the same, we cannot factor them out. So you factor out the 3n minus 2, and you are left with n minus 2. So there you have it, folks. So this, again, is our AC method. All right, hopefully that helped you out. Go and try some problems on your own. All right, take it easy.